Welcome, dear listener. I'm so glad you're here tonight, joining me on this quiet journey through history. Tonight, we'll drift back, softly, into the bustling, sun-warmed streets of ancient Rome. A world both magnificent and, perhaps, a little unforgiving. We'll wander through its markets, its crowded homes, and its noisy, dusty forums, imagining what it might have been like to survive just a single day in that city as you listen. You might let your mind wander gently. Where are you tuning in from tonight? What hour of the day is it where you are? Perhaps you feel like sharing a little note in the comments, a whisper of your own time and place. Let us step slowly into the rhythm of Roman life. Feel the heat of the midday sun on the stone streets, hear the distant chatter of citizens and merchants, and sense the weight of a city alive with ambition, power, and danger. Tonight, we will explore not only the grandeur, but also the trials, the small hardships, and the little perils that could make even the strongest visitor long for home. And so, with a soft exhale, let us begin. In the quiet heart of ancient Rome, imagine stepping into Rome at the height of the empire. Around 100 CE, the city is alive with more than just monumental architecture. Its streets pulse with the chaos of daily life. With over 1 million inhabitants, Rome's urban landscape is dense, loud, and relentless. Narrow streets, sometimes barely wide enough for 2 carts, are packed with merchants, citizens, beggars, and animals. Every step requires attention. Every corner hides potential danger. Survival here demands awareness, patience, and a subtle understanding of the city's rhythms. The streets themselves are a living organism. Cartwheels rattle over uneven stone paving. Horses and mules bray impatiently. And the air carries the constant smells of sweat, garbage, and food. Vendors shout their wares, fresh bread, olives, garum fermented fish sauce, while pickpockets move silently in the crowd. Noise and smell are relentless companions, shaping the experience of daily life. People who have lived in Rome for decades develop an almost instinctive ability to navigate this chaos, sensing danger and opportunity in equal measure. For newcomers, the experience is overwhelming. It is easy to become lost, jostled, or even injured by the press of the city itself. Social interactions add another layer of complexity. Freedmen who have recently gained liberty assert themselves boldly, eager to claim space in both commerce and conversation. Slaves move cautiously, always aware of their masters and their place within the social hierarchy. Citizens of wealth and influence negotiate the streets with confidence, while beggars and street performers weave among the crowd, each performing their own small acts of survival. The streets are a continuous negotiation of visibility, power, and risk. Despite the apparent disorder, there is structure embedded in daily routines. Specific streets are dominated by particular trades. The cloth merchants occupy one lane, the butchers another. Fountains and public wells offer respite and water for the weary. Small shrines dedicated to household gods dot intersections, providing brief moments of pause and reflection. Yet, even these spaces are crowded. Solitude is rare, and quiet is almost non-existent. The city's pulse never ceases, and even the simplest task, buying bread, collecting water, or delivering a careful timing and vigilance. Beyond the sensory overwhelm, there are tangible risks. The crowded streets facilitate the rapid spread of disease. Accidents, both minor and severe, are common, from tripping on uneven stones to being struck by a runaway cart. Criminal activity is constant. Pickpockets, con artists, and thieves operate with remarkable efficiency. Even a minor lapse in attention could result in lost possessions, or worse, injury. Yet, this danger is normalized by residents. Awareness, adaptation, and local knowledge are the keys to survival in a city where complacency is punished quickly. And still, there is opportunity amid the chaos. Merchants gain customers, artisans find commissions, and political voices echo. In the forum, every street corner offers both risk and reward. But as you weave deeper into the alleys, closer to the city's densest quarters, a question emerges. How did ordinary Romans endure a lifetime in a place so overwhelming, so unforgiving, and so unpredictable? Could survival itself be considered the greatest achievement of life in the empire? Having survived the initial shock of Rome's relentless streets, you begin to notice the patterns and routines that shape daily life. The city is not chaos without reason. It is an intricate network of paths, rhythms, and hierarchies that only reveal themselves to those who observe carefully. Every street has a pulse, every crowd a flow. Merchants open their shops early, calling out to early risers, while carts laden with goods clatter along the paving stones. By mid-morning, the streets swell with laborers, artisans, and traders, all performing precise roles in this enormous urban organism. Daily survival in Rome requires more than caution. It demands strategy. The poor learn to memorize shortcuts and alleyways, navigating around the busiest intersections to avoid pickpockets or aggressive vendors. Shopkeepers establish familiar routes for deliveries, coordinating with colleagues to minimize congestion. Even minor details, such as which side of the street to walk on during market hours, can prevent collisions with overloaded carts or stray animals. Residents develop an almost instinctive sense of timing. Moving in synchrony with the ebb and flow of the city, social dynamics continue to shape the streets. Freedmen, striving to assert their status, might dominate certain corners, while slaves, trained to remain inconspicuous, carry heavy loads without drawing attention. Children run between legs of adults, often underfoot, adding both charm and hazard to the streetscape. Public spaces are arenas of negotiation. Gestures, glances, and vocal exchanges communicate hierarchy and intent. Those who misread the signs risk confrontation, ridicule, or worse. For a newcomer, the city feels like a living chessboard, each move requiring thought and awareness. Rome's infrastructure itself contributes to the challenge. Streets are narrow, uneven, and rarely cleaned by modern standards. Waste from homes, animals, and markets accumulates in gutters, producing both odor and danger. Overflowing drains and sudden rain can turn a street into a treacherous path, forcing pedestrians to leap over mud, refuse, or stagnant water. Bridges, stairs, and public fountains create bottlenecks that slow the flow of traffic. Yet they are also opportunities for social interaction. In these pauses, gossip spreads, deals are made, and information about the city circulates. Survival is as much about knowledge as it is about caution. Even the city's authorities seem distant. Watchmen patrol sporadically, and law enforcement is inconsistent. Street crimes are common, yet most citizens learn to tolerate minor thefts or verbal harassment as an unavoidable part of life. Vigilance is the citizen's primary protection. The truly skilled navigate not only obstacles, but social tensions, knowing which individuals to appease, which groups to avoid, and how to project confidence even when uncertain. Yet, despite all these challenges, life continues. Merchants sell their wares, children play, slaves carry out their duties, and citizens go about their routines. The city hums with resilience. And still, a thought lingers. How did the most vulnerable survive? In this environment, the poor, the elderly, the sick. In a city so dense, loud, and unrelenting, were there hidden networks, informal alliances, or daily rituals that allowed ordinary Romans to endure, day after day, year after year? The answers remain just out of reach, hinting at strategies of survival that are invisible to outsiders but essential to life in the empire. After years of observing and participating in the rhythm of Rome's streets, a clearer picture of urban survival emerges. Life in the city demanded constant adaptation, careful observation, and a balance between caution and opportunity. Ordinary. Romans developed habits that outsiders would find extraordinary. Early rising to avoid the busiest streets, memorizing the safest routes, and forming alliances with neighbors or fellow merchants to protect property and share information. The city, though relentless, rewarded those who learned its rules. The urban landscape shaped every aspect of life. Shops and market stalls were strategically placed, ensuring that goods flowed efficiently and that merchants maximized visibility. Residential buildings, or insulae, pressed tightly against each other, creating both community and vulnerability. Families learned to coexist with constant noise and occasional hazards, and even leisure activities, conversations, games, or social gatherings required awareness of the surrounding chaos. Over time, Romans became experts in reading subtle cues, the tone of a vendor's shout, the path of an approaching cart, the body language of a passerby. These skills were not trivial. They were essential survival tools in a city where one misstep could result in injury, theft, or humiliation. Children grew up in this environment, learning early the importance of observation and timing. Even the elderly, though physically slower, relied on familiarity and experience to navigate safely. Public spaces, while crowded, offered opportunities to gather news, exchange goods, or participate in civic life. Rome's social networks, formal and informal, functioned as lifelines, helping individuals endure not only the physical dangers, but also the psychological strain of constant stimulation. Those who failed to adapt often disappeared from the historical record, leaving little trace of their struggles in the crowded streets. Yet, despite all precautions and adaptations, unpredictability remained. Fires could erupt suddenly, animals could break free, and disease spread rapidly among dense populations. Even the most experienced residents lived with a constant awareness of fragility. This tension between human resilience and vulnerability defined life in Rome. Every successful day was both a small victory and a reminder of how quickly circumstances could turn. Ultimately, the crowded streets of Rome illustrate not just the challenges of urban living, but the ingenuity, patience, and resilience of its inhabitants. They survived by observing patterns, forming connections, and mastering the subtle dance of social and physical navigation. The chaos, for all its dangers, also fostered adaptability and problem-solving skills that allowed ordinary people to endure the pressures of one of history's largest cities. And so, as you imagine walking among the vendors, children, and carts, you may wonder how much of modern urban life mirrors this ancient struggle. Are we, in our own way, still learning to navigate crowds, noise, and constant stimulation? In Rome, survival was the reward for those who learned the city's hidden rules a lesson that, quietly and surprisingly, echoes into the streets we walk today. Imagine stepping into the streets of Rome, where the sounds of carts and crowds are accompanied by a constant, underlying reminder of the city's most persistent problem: waste. Unlike modern cities, with sewer systems and sanitation departments, Rome relied on a mix of ingenuity, improvisation, and sheer tolerance to manage human and animal waste for over 1 million inhabitants. The Cloaca Maxima, one of the earliest and most ambitious engineering feats of the empire, was at the heart of this system, a massive drainage network originally constructed in the 6th century BCE to carry waste from the Forum and surrounding areas into the Tiber River. Walking near the city's markets, fountains, or insulae, you quickly notice the omnipresence of filth. Streets are often lined with refuse, discarded food, broken pottery, and the detritus of daily life. In wealthier districts, larger houses might have private latrines connected to the sewer, while the majority of citizens rely on public latrines, or simply dispose of waste into the streets. Chamber pots were emptied out of windows directly onto the paving below, a method that, while practical for individuals, contributes to the constant challenge of keeping streets navigable and somewhat hygienic. Water, however, is equally crucial. Rome's aqueducts, engineering marvels stretching tens of miles, bring fresh water into the city, feeding fountains, baths, and private homes of the elite. Public fountains provide both drinking water and opportunities for washing, but access is unequal. Poorer citizens often must travel significant distances or rely on limited public sources, making daily hydration and hygiene an ongoing concern. Water is abundant for some, scarce for others, yet it is the lifeline that allows the population to persist despite the constant proximity of waste. The Cloaca Maxima, running beneath the city, is an architectural solution that is both practical and dangerous. During periods of heavy rain, it can overflow, flooding streets and carrying filth into public spaces. Maintenance is a constant challenge. Debris, sediment, and even animal carcasses must be cleared to keep the sewers functioning. Workers assigned to this task face risks not only from disease but from the tunnels themselves, confined spaces, strong currents, and structural weaknesses make it a hazardous occupation. Despite this, the system largely succeeds, allowing Rome to support an urban population that would have overwhelmed lesser cities every day. Romans develop strategies to cope. Citizens learn which streets are cleaner at particular times of day, how to navigate around overflowing drains, and which public latrines are safest. Vendors often elevate their stalls or cover produce to protect against contamination, while families teach children the rituals of personal hygiene and street navigation. The intersection of water and waste shapes nearly every aspect of city life, from commerce to social interaction to daily routines. Yet, even with aqueducts and sewers, disease remains a constant threat. Outbreaks of dysentery, typhoid, and other waterborne illnesses occur regularly, often exacerbated by crowding, poor waste disposal, and seasonal flooding. The Romans' engineering brilliance mitigates some risks, but it cannot eliminate them entirely. The tension between survival and sanitation is woven into the fabric of urban life, as you imagine walking through the streets, balancing between flowing water, overflowing drains, and the constant smells of the city. One question lingers. How did ordinary Romans psychologically endure this environment? Was the resilience of the population born from necessity, ingenuity, or a cultural acceptance of filth as an unavoidable aspect of life in the empire? By now, you begin to see how the Romans' relationship with water and waste was not simply a matter of survival, but a complex interplay of engineering, social behavior, and adaptation. The Cloaca Maxima, though impressive, was only one piece of a sprawling network of drainage channels, smaller sewers, and open drains that ran beneath and alongside streets. Wealthy homes might connect directly to this subterranean system, but the majority of citizens relied on public latrines, small private facilities, or improvised methods. In crowded neighborhoods, the difference between sanitation and squalor could be a single street, or even a single household. Public latrines were social hubs as much as functional spaces. Long benches with holes carved into stone allowed multiple users to relieve themselves simultaneously, while channels of flowing water carried waste away. For the Romans, these spaces were ordinary and necessary, and yet they could also be breeding grounds for disease. The practice of communal sponges on stick shed for cleansing illustrates both ingenuity and risk. Even the simplest tasks, such as maintaining personal hygiene, required a balance of efficiency, caution, and social etiquette. The aqueducts themselves were marvels of planning, supplying water to fountains, baths, and private villas. The rich could enjoy running water in their homes, but ordinary citizens depended on public fountains and cisterns. Here, water management and waste management intersected in subtle ways. Overflow from sewers could contaminate streets and public water sources, particularly during periods of heavy rain or flooding. Citizens learned to adapt, washing early in the morning, avoiding certain streets, and covering food to prevent contamination. Survival in the city required constant attention to these environmental hazards. Combining observation with practical knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Maintenance of the sewers was both vital and dangerous. Workers, often slaves, or lower-class laborers, entered the tunnels with baskets and tools, removing blockages and repairing structural damage. Their work ensured that the city could continue to function, yet it carried physical risks, confined spaces, strong currents, and the presence of waste that could cause illness or injury. Rome's ability to sustain such a dense population depended not just on the ingenuity of engineers, but on the resilience and labor of these often invisible workers. Interestingly, sanitation also shaped social and economic behavior. Merchants elevated their goods above street level, while families taught children which routes were safe and which should be avoided. Market regulations attempted to reduce contamination, and public officials sometimes inspected streets and drains. These measures indicate that Romans were not passive in the face of filth. They actively negotiated, monitored, and adapted to the challenges of urban hygiene. Yet, despite these precautions, the threat of disease and contamination remained ever present. Epidemics could strike suddenly, altering daily life and killing thousands. Even with aqueducts and sewers, the crowded streets of Rome were vulnerable, a constant reminder of the fragility of urban life. And so, a question lingers as you walk alongside the flowing drains and busy fountains. How much of Roman ingenuity was driven by necessity, and how much by the desire to assert control over a city teeming with both life and decay? What strategies did the average citizen adopt, unseen and unrecorded, to survive in a world where water and waste were never far apart? As you observe the streets and underground channels of Rome over weeks or months, the full picture of the city's sanitation system emerges. Life in Rome depended on the delicate balance between water and waste, between infrastructure and human behavior. The Cloaca Maxima, once a simple drainage ditch, had grown into a vital artery of the city, carrying away refuse and stormwater alike. Its existence allowed Rome to support a population far larger than most contemporary cities. But the system was far from perfect. Overflow, blockages, and contamination were recurring hazards, reminding citizens that survival in this urban environment required both ingenuity and vigilance. The average Roman developed strategies that seem remarkable from a modern perspective. Families learned to navigate streets and drains safely, avoiding hazards while maintaining access to water. Merchants elevated their goods and adjusted stall placement to protect against contamination. Children grew up understanding the rhythms of flowing water and the location of latrines. Even leisure activities, from bathing to socializing in public fountains, required awareness of potential dangers. Survival was not only about avoiding illness or injury, it was about understanding the city's invisible networks and learning to live in harmony with both its benefits and its perils. Workers in the sewers, often unacknowledged in history, played an indispensable role. Their labor kept the system functional, clearing debris and repairing tunnels that could otherwise flood streets with waste. These efforts demonstrate that Rome's population relied not only on engineering brilliance, but also on the endurance and courage of those who faced the filth directly. Life in the city was, therefore, a collective achievement. Each resident, whether elite or laborer, participated in a delicate choreography that maintained hygiene and allowed the empire to flourish. Yet, even with these measures, danger never fully disappeared. Epidemics, foul odors, and overflowing drains remained constant threats. The resilience of ordinary citizens, observing, and sometimes simply enduring, was perhaps the city's most critical defense. In effect, Rome's sanitation system was as much a social achievement as it was an engineering one. It relied on human discipline, local knowledge, and collective adaptation to succeed. Looking back, one sees that the Romans' relationship with water and waste shaped the very character of urban life. It influenced architecture, social interaction, commerce, and even leisure. The cloaca, maxima, and aqueducts were not merely technical solutions. They were frameworks around which the city's daily existence was organized. Without them, Rome could never have sustained the density and complexity that defined the empire at its height. And so, as you step away from the streets, fountains, and tunnels of ancient Rome, a final thought remains. Survival in this environment was never guaranteed. Yet the ingenuity and persistence of ordinary citizens allowed life to continue. Their everyday strategies, though often invisible, were the foundation of one of history's most remarkable cities. In a world where waste and water were inseparably intertwined, endurance became a quiet form of mastery and, perhaps, in its own way, a testament to the human capacity to thrive even in the filthiest of conditions. Imagine walking through the bustling streets of Rome, drawn by the smell of fresh bread and the chatter of citizens lining up for the daily grain distribution. The concept of unknown free or heavily subsidized grain for Roman citizens was often portrayed as a generous gift from the state, a way to maintain social peace and secure political loyalty. Yet, behind this seemingly simple system lies a story of immense logistical complexity, human tension, and the constant struggle for survival in a city of over 1 million people. Grain in Rome was more than food, it was power. The Roman government relied on a carefully organized system to transport vast quantities from Egypt, Sicily, and North Africa to the heart of the empire. Ships carried thousands of tons of grain across the Mediterranean, navigating storms, piracy, and unpredictable winds. Once docked at Ostia, the grain had to be stored, managed, and distributed efficiently. Granaries were built along the Tiber, massive stone warehouses designed to protect against spoilage, theft, and rodents. Despite these precautions, loss was inevitable. Rat, vermin, or theft could consume large portions of shipments before they reached the populace. For ordinary citizens, collecting grain was far from straightforward. Daily distribution points attracted massive crowds, creating chaotic scenes reminiscent of the crowded streets described earlier. Lines formed hours in advance, yet supply was never guaranteed. People jostled, argued, and sometimes clashed physically over access. Political tension flavored every interaction. Officials overseeing distribution were often scrutinized, bribed, or accused of favoritism. To survive, citizens had to understand the timing, location, and procedures of each distribution, forming informal networks to secure their share. The system also reflected inequality. While Roman citizens could claim grain, non-citizens, slaves, and the poor in surrounding regions received no such support. Even within the citizenry, those who were better connected or physically stronger often fared better. Women, the elderly, and children were particularly vulnerable, relying on family or neighbors to navigate the line safely. Survival in Rome required not only physical presence, but social knowledge, alliances, and sometimes sheer luck. Grain distribution influenced daily life in countless ways. Market activity, street congestion, and the timing of labor all revolved around the public bread was often supplemented by personal purchases, yet the cost of private bread could fluctuate dramatically. Citizens depended on a delicate balance between state provision and private trade. Any disruption or delayed shipment, bad weather, or political unrest could trigger hunger, riots, and widespread dissatisfaction. Yet, despite the hardships and tensions, the system endured for centuries. It became a cornerstone of Roman society, demonstrating the empire's capacity for organization and its reliance on both human effort and administrative oversight. And still, for those lining up day after day, waiting for a ration of grain to survive, one question remained ever present. How much of Roman stability rested on these daily, often perilous, struggles? Could the empire truly claim power if its citizens' survival was always at the mercy of ships, officials, and long lines? As the sun rises over Rome, the process of grain distribution becomes a citywide rhythm. Citizens awaken early, often before dawn, to secure a place in line for the day's rations. Timing is critical. Arrive too late, and the supply may already be gone. Arrive too early, and the wait becomes exhausting, especially for the elderly, or those with children. Merchants, street vendors, and onlookers watch and adapt to the flow, understanding that the distribution of grain influences commerce, traffic, and even political sentiment. Every day is a negotiation between patience, endurance, and strategy. The political dimension of the unknown is impossible to ignore. Grain distribution was often controlled by magistrates, aediles, or later, imperial officials who understood that access to food could secure loyalty or spark rebellion. Favoritism and corruption were risks inherent to the system. Citizens who understood the politics could leverage connections to improve their chances, while others were left navigating the chaos without assistance. The lines themselves became arenas of observation and information exchange. People traded news, gossip, and warnings, creating informal networks that extended beyond the distribution point. Survival required not just stamina, but awareness of social dynamics, storage, and transportation. Challenges further complicated matters. Granaries, though massive and fortified, were vulnerable to spoilage, theft, and logistical delays. A shipment, delayed by storms in the Mediterranean or piracy, could mean empty distribution points for days. The quality of the grain was uneven. Sometimes it was fresh, sometimes damp or infested. Citizens had to develop a keen sense of evaluating grain quality, deciding quickly how to use or store it to avoid waste and malnutrition. The entire system was a precarious balance of engineering, human labor, and constant vigilance. The impact of grain distribution extended beyond survival. It shaped daily behavior, social relations, and even urban planning. Streets leading to distribution centers were busier and more dangerous, requiring careful navigation, especially for those carrying children or vulnerable family members. Public disputes could erupt into physical confrontations, particularly if officials were perceived as unfair or supply was insufficient. Citizens learned to anticipate these tensions, forming alliances and developing routines to minimize risk. In essence, navigating the free grain system became a survival skill, a daily exercise in strategy, patience, and social intelligence. Despite the challenges, the unknown system persisted, illustrating Rome's remarkable administrative capacity. Yet even this brilliance had limits. Riots could erupt when shipments failed, revealing how closely urban stability depended on food supply. Hunger was not merely a private concern. It was a political tool, a measure of the empire's control over its populace. And still, for those standing in line, the uncertainty never disappeared. Every ration claimed, every loaf acquired, was both a small victory and a reminder of fragility. As you watch these lines of citizens, moving patiently yet tensely, one question remains unresolved. How did ordinary Romans, mentally and emotionally, endure the constant pressure of securing food, knowing that a delay, spoilage, or mistake could threaten survival? Was resilience in this context simply a matter of habit, or did it reflect deeper ingenuity and communal support that the historical record only hints at? Over time, a clearer picture emerges of how Rome's citizens navigated the daily challenges of the unknown. What might appear to outsiders as a simple distribution of grain was, in reality, a carefully negotiated system shaped by logistics, social dynamics, and human resilience. Each morning, lines of citizens waiting for bread became a microcosm of Roman society. The wealthy and connected, the cautious and observant, the desperate and unprepared, all jostling for their share. Survival in these moments required not just physical stamina, but an understanding of the city's rhythms and its people. The logistics behind the grain supply reveal a staggering level of organization. Ships sailed thousands of miles to bring grain from North Africa, Egypt, and Sicily. Granaries along the Tiber stored massive quantities, protected as much from theft as from natural decay. Officials meticulously oversaw the process, while workers handled storage, transport, and distribution with precision. Yet despite this infrastructure, failure was always possible. Storms delayed shipments, floods ruined stockpiles, and bureaucratic errors left citizens hungry. In this precarious environment, each loaf distributed represented the intersection of human effort, administrative skill, and fortune. For ordinary Romans, the daily grind of securing grain shaped their lives in subtle but profound ways. Families adjusted their routines to line up efficiently. Children learned patience in crowded spaces, and neighborhoods developed informal networks to ensure that food reached those most in need. Even social hierarchies were reinforced through access. Those with political or familial connections often fared better, while the marginalized relied on observation, adaptation, and cooperation. In a city where basic sustenance was inseparably tied to the stability of daily life, resourcefulness was essential. Yet, there was a psychological dimension that is easy to overlook. Standing for hours in the heat or cold, jostled by crowds, and uncertain if the day's ration would suffice, citizens developed resilience under constant stress. Hunger, scarcity, and disorder became routine companions, shaping both expectations and behaviors. The system demanded that Romans not only survive physically but endure emotionally, adapting to an environment in which basic survival was never guaranteed. Looking back, the story of bread and grain illuminates more than just logistics. It reveals the character of Roman society itself. The empire's power depended not only on military strength or political authority, but on the quiet, persistent endurance of ordinary people. Each loaf handed out in the forum or along crowded streets was a testament to coordination, adaptation, and human persistence. It was the unrecorded courage of countless citizens standing in lines, navigating chaos, and finding ways to feed their families that allowed the empire to function on a daily basis. And so, as you imagine the long queues, the shouted orders, and the relief of securing a ration, one thought lingers. Survival in Rome was a collective achievement, fragile yet enduring. Perhaps the true power of the empire lay not in monuments or armies, but in the quiet resilience of those who waited patiently each day for their bread, sustaining themselves, their families, and, ultimately, the city itself. How many stories of endurance, skill, and ingenuity have remained invisible, hidden in the simple act of claiming a loaf of grain. Imagine standing at the base of a tall insula, a multi-story Roman apartment building in the heart of the city. From the outside, these structures appear impressive: stacked wooden floors, narrow staircases, and balconies overlooking bustling streets. But the closer you look, the more apparent the danger becomes. Rome's insulae were crowded, densely packed, and often poorly constructed. Wood and other flammable materials dominated the upper stories, while lower floors were usually stone or brick. Living here offered proximity to commerce and the city's vibrant life, but it came with constant risk. Fire was one of the greatest threats to ordinary Romans. Open flames were everywhere: oil lamps, cooking fires, braziers for warmth. Even a single knocked-over lamp could spark a blaze that raced up the wooden floors of an insula, engulfing apartments within minutes. In the most crowded neighborhoods, escape routes were limited, staircases narrow, and exits sometimes blocked. Residents became acutely aware of the fragility of their homes, learning early to manage fire carefully and respond quickly to emergencies. A moment of carelessness could destroy possessions, displace families, or even cost lives. Water, though available through fountains and public wells, was often insufficient for firefighting. Romans had organized fire brigades by the 1st century CE, but response times were limited, and many small fires were contained only by the quick thinking of residents themselves. People stored buckets, kept sand or water nearby, and developed informal signals to alert neighbors when danger struck. Communities often relied on cooperation. The ringing of a bell or shouted warning could mobilize multiple households to fight a fire before it spread further. Survival, in these moments, depended on speed, coordination, and awareness of the building's weaknesses. Living in a wooden insula also meant confronting structural hazards. Floors could sag or collapse under heavy loads, staircases were narrow and often steep, and balconies jutted precariously over crowded streets. Noise traveled easily, privacy was scarce, and personal safety depended on vigilance. Tenants learned to navigate these risks daily. Children were taught to avoid weak floorboards. Residents memorized alternate routes through apartments, and neighbors often developed a shared understanding of the building's quirks. Adaptation was a form of survival. Economic factors shaped exposure to risk. The wealthiest citizens could afford sturdier stone apartments or private houses, while the urban poor lived higher in the wooden structures where fire risk was greatest. The higher floors, often cheapest, were simultaneously the most dangerous. Evacuation was slow, firefighting was difficult, and belongings were most vulnerable. Yet, many accepted this risk in exchange for proximity to work, trade, or social connections. Life in the insula was a delicate balance between opportunity and danger. Even as residents adapted, a constant tension remained: the unpredictability of fire, the instability of wooden construction, and the crowded streets below created an environment where safety was never guaranteed. People learned routines, established informal networks, and relied on communal awareness. But each day carried the implicit knowledge that disaster could strike suddenly. And so, as you imagine walking through a narrow wooden corridor, the scent of oil lamps and cooking fires in the air, one question lingers: how did ordinary Romans psychologically endure life in such precarious conditions, where comfort, community, and danger were inseparably intertwined? Could daily survival in a wooden insula be considered an art of caution perfected over decades? By spending more time in the insulae, the strategies Romans developed to cope with constant fire hazards become clear. Every household learned to anticipate danger, from carefully maintaining oil lamps to monitoring cooking fires. Residents used simple but effective precautions: metal trays beneath lamps, buckets of water near cooking areas, and sand stored for emergencies. Even children understood basic fire safety, often rehearsing evacuation routes with family members. These measures, passed down through generations, became part of daily routine acquired, constant awareness that shaped the rhythm of life. The architecture of the insulae further influenced survival strategies. Lower floors, built with stone or brick, were safer and thus more expensive, while upper wooden floors were cheaper and riskier. Wealthier tenants sometimes reinforced their apartments with stone or added small firewalls, while poorer households relied on vigilance and communal assistance. Staircases and balconies became lifelines. Residents memorized escape paths and developed signals for alerting neighbors. In emergencies, quick coordination often determined whether a fire remained small or engulfed an entire building. Community networks were essential. Residents learned to rely on neighbors, forming informal watch groups to monitor fires and assist in evacuation. The sound of a shouted warning or the clang of a metal bell could mobilize multiple households in minutes. In some cases, these networks extended beyond a single building, linking adjacent insulae or streets. Cooperation was not optional, it was survival. Families and individuals depended on both their own awareness and the attentiveness of others to navigate the hazards of everyday life. Fire also shaped daily routines in subtle ways. Cooking schedules, lighting of lamps, and even heating choices were adapted to reduce risk. Households often limited open flames during higher risk periods, and residents were careful about where they stored flammable materials. The impermanence of wooden construction meant that possessions could never be entirely safe, so Romans learned to prioritize essential items, store valuables in stone chests, or keep them close at hand. Daily life became an ongoing negotiation between convenience, comfort, and safety. Despite all precautions, unpredictability was unavoidable. Fires could start suddenly, fueled by a spilled lamp, a careless spark, or even lightning. The higher the apartment, the greater the risk, as evacuation became slower and firefighting more difficult. Roman authorities recognized these dangers. Regulations limited building height in some districts and sometimes required the use of fireproof materials. However, enforcement was uneven, and the population's rapid growth often outpaced oversight. Ordinary citizens had to manage their environment actively, using both knowledge and vigilance to survive. Even with collective strategies and architectural adaptations, one question remained at the forefront of every resident's mind. How did people endure the constant anxiety of living in structures so inherently fragile? Beyond physical survival, the psychological resilience required to inhabit these wooden apartments, where danger was ever present, was remarkable. Did Romans develop a mindset of acceptance, or did fear subtly shape their decisions, interactions, and daily routines? After months of observing life in the insulae, a clearer picture emerges of how Romans survived in these precarious wooden structures. Fire was a constant, invisible companion, shaping architecture, daily routines, and social connections. Residents developed strategies, both practical and psychological, careful handling of lamps and braziers, memorized escape routes, and reliance on neighbors for early warnings. Survival demanded more than quick reflexes. It required a constant awareness of risk woven into every action. Community cooperation was essential. When flames broke out, multiple households often acted together to extinguish fires, evacuate children, and salvage possessions. Informal networks mattered as much as official regulations, creating a safety net of human vigilance in a city where enforcement was inconsistent. Even without authority, residents protected themselves collectively. A quiet testament to human ingenuity. Architecture and daily routines reflected this constant danger. Lower floors, made of stone and brick, were safer and more desirable, while upper wooden floors remained cheaper but hazardous. Households adapted by storing essential items safely, limiting open flames, and adjusting cooking and heating practices. Children learned these rules early, embedding knowledge of danger and response into daily life. Such adaptations, though subtle, were vital for surviving both small incidents and catastrophic blazes. Yet, even with vigilance, disaster could strike instantly, consuming entire floors within minutes. Life in the insula demanded alertness, coordination, and sometimes sheer luck. The psychological weight of constant danger defined the rhythm of urban life. Romans developed resilience from childhood exposure to risk, where fear and practicality existed side by side. Survival was never guaranteed, and yet life went on. Markets thrived, families grew, and the city's pulse persisted. The insulae reveal a larger lesson about urban Rome. The grandeur of the empire masked everyday vulnerability. Ordinary citizens navigated hazards not through heroism, but through careful adaptation, communal cooperation, and persistent awareness. As you imagine moving through narrow corridors, listening to neighbors' warnings, and stepping over uneven floorboards, one truth stands out. The true marvel of Roman urban life was not just its engineering, but the quiet endurance of ordinary people, shaping a city that would survive for centuries, brick by brick, fire by fire. As you walk through the bustling streets of ancient Rome, you notice the constant tension woven into daily life. Beyond the noise of carts, merchants, and citizens, another reality exists: the ever-present threat of street violence and theft. Rome's streets were crowded, unevenly paved, and often poorly lit at night. In this environment, ordinary citizens, merchants, laborers, and even officials had to navigate a web of danger, aware that a wrong step or misplaced trust could have serious consequences. Pickpockets, petty thieves, and organized gangs were common, especially in the busiest marketplaces and crowded thoroughfares. Travelers and newcomers were particularly vulnerable, lacking familiarity with the safest routes or the subtle social cues that signaled potential danger. Residents learned early to be alert, keeping purses, jewelry, and personal items close at hand. Merchants displayed their goods strategically, balancing accessibility for customers with protection against theft. The flow of commerce was inseparably tied to vigilance. A distracted moment could result in significant loss. Violence in the streets was another pressing concern. Fights could erupt over disputes, insults, or even accidental collisions in the crowded environment. Roman law existed, but enforcement was inconsistent. Magistrates and urban cohorts could not monitor every alley, market, or staircase. Citizens often relied on informal methods, knowing which neighborhoods to avoid at night, forming alliances with neighbors or local watchmen, or carrying simple defensive tools. Survival required both situational awareness and the ability to read people's intentions in a glance or gesture before danger escalated. The social dynamics of theft and violence were complex. Some neighborhoods were notorious for criminal activity, while others maintained an unspoken order enforced by residents themselves. Informal justice shaming, public confrontation, or retribution was common when official authorities were unavailable. Citizens learned to navigate these codes carefully, balancing caution with the need to maintain social connections, conduct business, and move freely through the city. Risk was constant, yet the city thrived because people adapted. Even children were taught the rules of survival. They learned to stay close to family in crowded areas, avoid certain streets, and recognize behaviors that signaled trouble. Street vendors and pedestrians alike understood the rhythm of safety. Some times of day were more dangerous than others, certain corners more treacherous, and some routes safer only if accompanied by trusted neighbors or friends. The city became a living map of risk and opportunity, where knowledge and observation were as crucial as strength or courage. Despite these adaptations, unpredictability remained a constant companion. Fights could erupt without warning, thieves could strike despite precautions, and strangers could pose unseen threats. Ordinary Romans developed routines, networks, and strategies, yet no system could fully guarantee safety. Daily life demanded vigilance, quick thinking, and an acceptance of uncertainty. As you imagine walking these streets, watching merchants, pedestrians, and children, one question lingers: how did Romans mentally and emotionally endure the constant presence of danger in their daily lives? Did vigilance become second nature, or did fear shape every interaction, subtly influencing decisions and behavior across the bustling city? As you spend more time navigating Rome's streets, the strategies residents developed to manage danger become clearer. Awareness and preparation were central to survival. Merchants carefully chose their store locations, avoiding dark alleys or areas where gangs were known to gather. They learned to read body language and subtle social cue shifts. In posture, unusual hesitation or a suspicious glance could signal impending theft or confrontation. Even small routines, such as keeping one hand on a bag or moving with a familiar group, were critical. Survival depended as much on observation and intuition as on strength or courage. Neighborhoods had distinct reputations, and Romans adapted. Accordingly, some districts were safer due to informal social enforcement. Residents monitored their streets, intervened in disputes, and maintained local norms that discouraged theft. Other areas were notorious for violence, and caution became instinctual. Travelers and newcomers often relied on guides or local contacts, while long-time residents developed a deep mental map of safe passages, crowded spots, and higher-risk zones. Knowledge of the city's social geography was a matter of life and death. Street gangs and petty thieves were not always random. Some operated with structured methods, coordinating thefts or ambushes in particular areas at specific times. Roman authorities banned cohorts, and local magistrates could intervene, but their presence was limited. Most citizens relied on community networks, alerting neighbors and forming alliances to protect property and personal safety. These networks were crucial, especially for those living or working on the higher wooden floors of insulae where escape routes were narrow and evacuation was difficult. Survival was collective as much as it was individual. Even routine activities carried risks. Traveling to the market, carrying grain from a public distribution, or transporting goods at night required careful planning. Women, children, and the elderly faced particular vulnerability, often relying on family members or neighbors to navigate streets safely. Parents instructed children in the rhythms of the city, which streets to avoid, when to move quickly or slowly, and how to read subtle signals of danger. These lessons, though practical, also shaped behavior, instilling caution and situational awareness from a young age. Despite these precautions, unpredictability remained. A momentary distraction, a sudden confrontation, or an unfamiliar stranger could append careful planning. Violence was often sudden and public, occurring in the open, while theft could strike anywhere from crowded markets to narrow corridors of apartment buildings. Romans adapted by accepting uncertainty as part of life, developing routines that minimized risk while allowing them to maintain social and economic activity. This constant negotiation between safety and necessity defined urban life. Even with vigilance and community support, questions linger about the psychological toll of living in such an environment. How did citizens endure the constant pressure of potential danger, balancing fear with daily routines? Did adaptability become second nature, or did a subtle, pervasive anxiety influence their choices, shaping the way Romans experienced their city day by day? Over time, a clearer understanding emerges of how ordinary Romans navigated the constant dangers of urban life. Violence and theft were not occasional disruptions. They were woven into the city's daily rhythms. Citizens developed intricate strategies to survive, combining personal vigilance, social networks, and learned routines. Every street, alley, and marketplace demanded constant awareness. Every step carried the possibility of confrontation. Survival relied on observation, adaptation, and the quiet skill of reading people and situations. Community played a crucial role in reducing risk. Residents depended on neighbors, friends, and family to provide warnings, intervene in disputes, or escort vulnerable individuals through dangerous areas. Informal networks acted as early warning systems and deterrents. In some neighborhoods, residents collectively maintained order, discouraging theft and responding swiftly to violence. The social fabric of the city itself became a survival mechanism, showing how communal vigilance could sometimes surpass the reach of official authorities. Merchants and laborers developed their own protective routines. Market stalls were arranged strategically, valuables secured, and goods displayed to minimize opportunity for theft. Daily routes were planned carefully, avoiding streets known for ambushes or late-night danger. Even leisure activities, like visiting baths or attending public events, required awareness of timing and location. Romans integrated caution into nearly every aspect of urban life, turning constant alertness into a practical skill, yet unpredictability remained unavoidable. Sudden outbreaks of violence could flare in crowded areas, and theft or assault often struck without warning. While adaptation and cooperation reduced risk, no system guaranteed safety. The fragility of daily life in Rome underscored the resilience of its citizens. Living under constant threat, they developed not only physical strategies for protection, but also psychological resilience, allowing them to carry on with work, family, and social life despite uncertainty. The broader lesson of these streets is profound. Roman urban life relied not only on engineering, governance, or commerce, but also on the endurance and ingenuity of ordinary citizens navigating danger every day. Their skills, vigilance, adaptation, and reliance on communities sustained the functioning of the city as much as its aqueducts, granaries, and infrastructure. As you imagine walking through a crowded marketplace, hearing shouted warnings, and noticing wary glances, one thought lingers. Survival in Rome was not just about avoiding theft or injury, it was about cultivating awareness, resilience, and a form of social intelligence that allowed the city to endure. How many lives passed in quiet, vigilance unnoticed by history, yet essential to the heartbeat of the empire. As you stroll through the streets of ancient Rome, your senses are immediately overwhelmed by a medley of scents, some pleasant, many not. The air is thick with the odors of markets, garbage, and open sewers, a constant reminder that urban life is as much about surviving smells as it is about navigating streets. Food preservation, or the lack thereof, shapes this environment in profound ways. Without refrigeration or modern sanitation, Romans had to manage perishable goods carefully, balancing the desire for fresh produce with the harsh realities of spoilage, rot, and mold. Markets are the lifeblood of the city, yet they are also a stage for the daily struggle against decay. Fruits, vegetables, meat, and fish are displayed openly, exposed to sun, flies, and bacteria. Merchants develop methods to slow spoilage, salting fish, drying grains, covering goods with cloth, or storing produce in cool, shaded areas. Some products are pickled or fermented, preserving them for weeks or even months. Romans understood the rhythms of decay, and citizens learned to recognize the signs of freshness or contamination. The survival of a household often depended on these small but critical judgments. Storage is another crucial factor. Wealthier households may have access to ceramic jars, stone containers, or underground cellars that provide cooler, more stable environments for food. Ordinary citizens, living in insulae or smaller apartments, rely on simple solutions, suspended baskets, clay pots, or frequent trips to the market to ensure ingredients are used before they spoil. Grain, the foundation of Roman diet, is particularly vulnerable to rot and pests. Careful cleaning, drying, and storage were essential to prevent loss of this staple. Failure could mean hunger, malnutrition, or reliance on inferior substitutes. The smells of Rome extend beyond the market. Open sewers, overflowing drains, and discarded refuse mix with the aroma of cooking fires, fermenting wine, and baked bread. For the average citizen, these odors are part of daily life, accepted as a necessary accompaniment to sustenance. Hygiene practices intersect with food preservation. Washing hands, cleaning surfaces, and careful preparation reduce risk, yet complete protection is impossible. Living in the city requires constant vigilance, both to avoid spoiled food and to navigate the sensory challenges of urban life. Social and economic status influences exposure to rot and decay. The wealthy can afford imported or preserved foods, while the urban poor must contend with local produce and the unpredictable spoilage of daily purchases. Street vendors, too, face risk. Unsold goods can quickly degrade, forcing merchants to develop quick sales strategies or barter for less perishable items. Food scarcity, spoilage, and competition shape daily routines, creating a subtle but constant pressure that defines urban existence. Even with careful measures, decay is inevitable. Each rotten fruit, moldy loaf, or tainted fish reminds Romans of the fragility of life in the city. Survival is a combination of observation, experience, and adaptation, and even the most careful citizen cannot escape the consequences of time and environment. And so, as you imagine navigating these crowded, fragrant, and sometimes pungent streets, one question arises: how did ordinary Romans maintain both health and sanity amidst constant exposure to decay and foul smells? Was resilience a matter of routine, or did it require a deeper psychological adaptation to the impermanence of everyday life? As you spend more time in Rome, the subtle strategies for managing decay become more evident. Romans were acutely aware that their survival depended not only on acquiring food, but on preventing it from spoiling. Salt, a precious commodity, was used extensively to preserve meat and fish. Fish were layered with salt in barrels, a method that allowed them to travel long distances without rotting. Fruits and vegetables were often dried, pickled, or immersed in vinegar to extend shelf life. These methods were labor-intensive, requiring careful attention to timing and environmental conditions. Failure to preserve goods correctly could mean illness or starvation. Households employed additional techniques to cope with spoilage. Ceramic jars, amphorae, and earthenware containers protected contents from insects and moisture. Underground, cellars offered cooler storage, especially for perishable foods like grains and wine. Merchants, aware of the limited shelf life of their goods, timed deliveries to minimize waste. Daily routines revolved around observation, checking for signs of mold, decay, or insect infestation was part of ordinary life. Even minor lapses could have consequences, underscoring the importance of diligence in maintaining sustenance. The interaction between sanitation and food preservation was unavoidable. Open sewers, street refuse, and overflowing latrines introduced bacteria and disease into the urban environment. Citizens had to carefully wash and prepare food, sometimes relying on boiling, roasting, or fermenting to render it safe. Despite these precautions, contamination was a constant threat. outbreaks of dysentery, gastroenteritis, and other waterborne illnesses were common, particularly among the lower classes who had less access to preserved or imported foods. The urban poor learned to navigate these dangers through both experience and observation, adjusting diets and habits to reduce risk. Market dynamics also influenced exposure to rot. Vendors were under pressure to sell quickly, as unsold perishable goods could attract vermin or become unsafe to consume. Citizens, in turn, developed methods for assessing freshness, looking for discoloration, checking texture, sniffing for foul odors, knowledge of which markets, vendors, or neighborhoods provided the best quality goods became essential. Survival required both social intelligence and practical skill, recognizing patterns, learning from experience, and adjusting behavior accordingly. The smells of Rome, a mixture of cooked food, rotting waste, and fermenting liquids, were unavoidable. For many, they became normalized part of daily existence. Citizens adapted psychologically as well as physically. Resilience was not only about preserving food, but also about enduring an environment that constantly assaulted the senses. Life in the city demanded both practical skill and mental fortitude, as every meal, every trip to the market, was a negotiation with decay. And yet, despite careful observation, preservation techniques, and learned routines, the threat of rot and spoilage remained unpredictable. Each spoiled loaf, moldy vegetable, or contaminated fish was a reminder that survival in Rome was fragile. As you consider this reality, one question emerges. How did Romans reconcile the inevitability of decay with the necessity of daily sustenance? Was endurance a matter of learned routine, or did living amidst constant rot shape a deeper, almost instinctive resilience in the population? Over time, a clearer picture emerges of how ordinary Romans managed the constant presence of decay in daily life. Food preservation was not just a convenience, it was a survival skill, honed through observation, experience, and adaptation. Salted fish, dried grains, pickled vegetables, and carefully stored wine allowed households to endure the city's challenges. Yet despite these methods, spoilage was inevitable, and Romans learned to live with it as a constant factor. Sanitation, storage, and social awareness intersected in remarkable ways. Households monitored both their own food and the safety of market purchases. Merchants balanced speed, cleanliness, and strategy to maintain the value of goods, while citizens judged quality carefully, sometimes relying on informal recommendations or local reputation. Survival depended on knowledge, vigilance, and social intelligence, understanding patterns of decay, timing purchases, and making choices that maximized safety and efficiency. The smells of Roma, blend of cooking, rot, and fermenting liquid shaped urban life. Citizens adapted physically and psychologically, normalizing odors that modern sensibilities might find overwhelming. This mental adjustment allowed them to function effectively. Trading, preparing meals, and navigating crowded streets despite constant unpleasant scents. Endurance, in this sense, was as much a psychological skill as a practical one. Yet even with experience, life remained fragile. Spoiled food could cause illness, scarcity could limit dietary variety, and poor preservation could force households to consume risky provisions. These small, often invisible challenges shaped routines, social networks, and behavior. Citizens relied on personal skill and communal knowledge, exchanging advice, warning neighbors, and cooperating to reduce risk. Survival in Rome required observation, adaptation, and mutual reliance. Looking back, the story of preservation and decay reveals the resilience embedded in ordinary urban life. Rome's grandeur monuments, baths and aqueducts often overshadows the quiet ingenuity of citizens managing rot, mold, and contamination. Their daily endurance allowed the city to function, thrive, and support its population despite constant challenges. As you imagine crowded markets, carefully stored jars, and the ever-present aroma of decay, one thought lingers: survival in Rome was more than obtaining food. That was an ongoing negotiation with the environment, an exercise in vigilance, adaptation, and mental resilience. How much of the empire's daily functioning relied on the patient skill of citizens who turned spoilage into sustenance and danger into routine. In their quiet persistence, we glimpse the hidden foundation of one of history's greatest cities. In the bustling streets of ancient Rome, much of the labor that sustained the empire remained unseen. Slaves, an invisible yet essential workforce, performed tasks that ranged from domestic chores to skilled crafts, heavy construction, and even administrative duties. They were the backbone of daily life, yet their existence was defined by invisibility and subservience. Observing a villa, a marketplace, or a public bath, you might not notice the countless hands working behind the scenes, cooking meals, carrying goods, scrubbing floors, or ensuring the smooth operation of complex businesses. The lives of slaves varied depending on their roles and the wealth of their owners. Domestic slaves often lived within the household, performing menial tasks like cleaning, cooking, or attending to the family's needs. Skilled slaves, artisans, scribes, or accountants could command higher status within the household, yet their work remained bound by obligation rather than choice. Field slaves and laborers, on the other hand, endured grueling conditions in farms, mines, and construction sites, where long hours, physical strain, and exposure to the elements were routine. Survival required endurance, adaptability, and often quiet cunning. Urban slaves faced a different set of challenges. Those working in markets, workshops, or public offices navigated crowded streets, unpredictable clients, and the constant possibility of theft or injury. They were acutely aware of hierarchies, both among themselves and in relation to free citizens. Even minor errors could lead to punishment, and maintaining favor with supervisors or owners was a daily concern. Yet within these constraints, slaves developed networks of mutual support, sharing knowledge, alerting each other to danger, and occasionally assisting in subtle forms of resistance or negotiation. The economic significance of slaves cannot be overstated. They powered households, farms, businesses, and state projects, allowing Rome to function on a scale unimaginable without human labor. From the grain supply of the unknown to the construction of aqueducts and public buildings, much of the empire's infrastructure relied on their work. Slaves were both indispensable and disposable, and this duality shaped how they were treated, valued, and perceived. Despite the hardships, some slaves found ways to acquire skills, savings, or even manumission, highlighting the complex interplay between oppression and opportunity in Roman society. Life as a slave also demanded mental resilience, constant supervision, the threat of punishment, and the denial of personal autonomy required psychological endurance. Daily survival was not just about physical labor, but navigating a social environment in which one's position was precarious. Choices were limited, and self-preservation often depended on discretion and obedience. Many slaves internalized routines and habits that balanced efficiency with caution, mastering the art of existing within imposed constraints. Even with these adaptations, uncertainty was ever present. Illness, harsh treatment, or economic fluctuations could drastically alter a slave's circumstances. Their labor was essential, yet their lives were fragile. As you imagine the hidden world of Rome's invisible workforce, one question lingers. How did slaves maintain a sense of identity, dignity, or personal resilience in a society that treated them as both indispensable and expendable? As you observe the lives of Rome's slaves more closely, the complexity of their existence becomes evident. Life was rarely uniform. It was shaped by occupation, location, and the temperament of their owners. Domestic slaves often had constant proximity to their masters, performing personal tasks that required discretion, skill, and adaptability. Some became trusted aides, managing household finances, tutoring children, or assisting in business dealings. Yet even in these relatively privileged positions, the lack of personal autonomy remained absolute. Every action was dictated by duty, expectation, or fear of punishment. Field laborers and construction slaves faced an entirely different reality. Hours were long and physical demands intense. In rural estates, they tilled land, harvested crops, or tended livestock, often under harsh weather conditions. In the cities, laborers hauled materials for construction, repaired roads, or carried goods across markets. Survival required not only physical strength, but careful attention to timing, technique, and endurance. Mistakes could result in injury, loss of favor, or even brutal punishment. Daily life was a continuous negotiation between effort, compliance, and self-preservation. Despite these hardships, social bonds among slaves were a crucial form of resilience. Networks developed in households, neighborhoods, and workplaces, allowing the exchange of information, sharing of resources, and quiet acts of mutual support. In some cases, these networks facilitated small forms of resistance, delaying tasks, discreetly protecting possessions, or assisting others in learning valuable skills. Even within the constraints of servitude, slaves found ways to assert a measure of agency, cultivating skills that might improve their position or pave a path toward eventual freedom. Economic significance further complicated their existence. Slaves were central to the functioning of the empire, yet their contribution was often invisible. Public works, granaries, and trade relied heavily on their labor, but they remained largely uncredited. Owners recognized their value, yet treated them as property. This duality, being essential yet expendable, shaped the psychology of slavery. Survival depended on understanding not only the demands of labor, but the social hierarchy in which one operated. Knowledge of authority, timing, and opportunity was as important as strength or skill. Cultural factors also played a role. Some slaves were educated, bringing specialized knowledge from Greece, Egypt, or other provinces. These individuals could serve as teachers, scribes, or artisans, gaining a measure of respect and influence, yet always under the shadow of ownership. Even here, uncertainty remained. Illness, political upheaval, or economic downturns could instantly reduce status or end prospects for advancement. Life in the empire demanded constant adaptability and a keen sense of timing. Whether one was scrubbing floors, recording accounts, or building aqueducts, and yet, even with skill, experience, and social networks, vulnerability was constant. Slaves endured physical toil, emotional strain, and uncertainty about their futures. As you imagine this hidden workforce, hands shaping bread, hauling stones, preparing meals, the question arises: how did slaves psychologically manage lives so controlled, yet so crucial to the survival of the empire? Did endurance become instinctive, or did subtle forms of resistance and personal strategy allow them to retain a sense of identity in a world that denied it? Looking back at the daily lives of Rome's slaves, a vivid picture emerges of resilience, endurance, and adaptability. While their labor was essential to the empire's functioning, their existence remained largely invisible. Slaves toiled in households, fields, markets, and public works, performing tasks that sustained cities, infrastructure, and commerce. Their work allowed the empire to flourish, yet personal autonomy was severely constrained, shaping routines and psychology alike. Daily life required a careful balance of obedience, skill, and subtle strategies for survival. Domestic slaves might manage affairs, tutor children, or oversee other servants, while field laborers and construction workers endured exhausting physical toil. Across these roles, slaves developed remarkable adaptability, reading social cues, anticipating demands, and navigating hierarchies with quiet precision. These skills were essential in a system that valued efficiency and productivity over individuality. Social networks offered another vital source of resilience. Slaves relied on one another for advice, protection, and shared knowledge of routines or opportunities. In these small communities, subtle support and resistance emerged, sharing information about owners' habits, alerting peers to danger, or exchanging tips on managing labor. In some cases, these networks enabled the acquisition of skills or savings that could lead to manumission. Life as a slave demanded both communal cooperation and personal ingenuity, revealing an unexpected dimension of agency within extreme constraints. The psychological endurance required was immense. Constant supervision, the threat of punishment, and the denial of personal choice necessitated mental fortitude. Slaves learned to compartmentalize fear, anticipate challenges, and cultivate patience. Identity and dignity were preserved through skill, reputation among peers, or acts of quiet defiance. Even small victories, a completed task, the trust of an owner, or solidarity with fellow slaves, reinforced a sense of self within a system designed to suppress individuality. The broader historical significance is profound. While Rome's monumental architecture, institutions, and conquests are celebrated, the empire relied heavily on the invisible labor of slaves. Their endurance, skill, and resilience sustained the economy and social order. As you imagine a day in the life of a Roman slave sweeping floors, hauling stone, preparing meals, one thought lingers. How did such relentless labor and constraint shape the human spirit? In understanding their daily endurance, we glimpse a rarely visible yet essential facet of Roman history, a testament to the silent strength of the empire's workforce. As you imagine the vast expanse of the Roman Empire, one group stands out as its backbone: the legionaries. These soldiers were not only warriors, but also administrators, engineers, and enforcers of Roman authority. Life as a legionary was structured, rigorous, and demanding a relentless combination of discipline, labor, and readiness for combat. Each day began before dawn, with training, drills, and maintenance of equipment. Long before marching toward distant campaigns or remote outposts, the daily routine was dictated by order and efficiency. Soldiers trained in formation, swordsmanship, javelin throwing, and shield maneuvers, ensuring cohesion in battle. Beyond combat skills, much of their time was spent on practical labor, constructing roads, fortifications, and camps, digging trenches, and repairing defenses. These tasks demanded endurance, precision, and attention to detail. Mistakes were costly not just in punishment, but in risk to comrades and mission objectives. Discipline was absolute, and personal choice was limited, yet the structure instilled purpose and order. Marching was central to the legionary experience. Soldiers often covered 20 to 30 kilometers a day, carrying heavy packs, weapons, and gear. Terrain ranged from rugged mountains to marshy lowlands, and weather, supply shortages, or enemy harassment added strain. Each step required stamina, coordination, and vigilance. A single misstep could lead to injury, lost equipment, or separation. From the uniter, serious risk in hostile territory, life in the camp offered little respite. Legionaries slept in tents or simple barracks, often in close quarters with dozens of comrades. Hygiene was basic. Latrines and bathing facilities were minimal, and disease spread quickly. Yet routines were maintained meticulously. Cooking, guard, duty, and equipment upkeep were shared responsibilities. The camp was a microcosm of Roman order, with strict schedules, assigned roles, and hierarchy reinforcing discipline. Social bonds were essential, providing camaraderie, mutual support, and resilience against fatigue and danger. Nutrition and health were constant concerns. Soldiers relied on staples like grains, legumes, and salted meat. Supply disruptions forced rationing or foraging, increasing risk of illness or conflict. Injuries demanded endurance, as medical care was rudimentary. Adaptability was as important as strength. A legionary had to endure harsh conditions, remain battle-ready, and sustain health despite environmental challenges. Even within this rigid structure, uncertainty persisted. Ambushes, sudden orders, and shifting conditions demanded constant alertness. Life as a legionary balanced routine and unpredictability, labor and combat, individual endurance and collective strength. As you visualize, disciplined formations, relentless marches, and sweat-soaked camps, one thought remains: how did legionaries maintain focus, morale, and resilience in a life so regimented, exhausting, and psychologically taxing? Perhaps discipline and camaraderie together carried them through the demands of empire-building. As the days unfold in a legionary's life, the balance between discipline, labor, and survival becomes increasingly evident. The march, while central to military strategy, was as much a test of endurance as a logistical necessity. Soldiers carried their own food, water, and equipment, often totaling 30 to 40 kilograms. The terrain was rarely forgiving. Rocky hills, muddy valleys, and narrow passes challenged both physical strength and morale. A misstep could result in sprains, exhaustion, or separation from the unit, which could prove deadly if enemy forces were nearby. Camp life demanded as much vigilance as the battlefield. Once the day's march concluded, soldiers constructed temporary fortifications, pitched tents, and dug defensive ditches. Each soldier had assigned duties, whether maintaining weapons, preparing meals, or standing watch through the night. Sleep was often minimal, interrupted by the needs of the unit or the threat of raids. The ability to function effectively on little rest was essential. Fatigue could compromise not only personal safety but the security of the entire camp. Health and hygiene were constant concerns. Latrines were basic, and the close quarters made the spread of disease inevitable. Small injuries from drills, labor, or even marching could worsen quickly if neglected. Legionaries learned to monitor their own health and support comrades, practicing basic care for wounds, blisters, and fatigue. Nutrition was similarly precarious. Staples like hard bread, salted meat, and dried legumes were often supplemented with local forage, but these were unreliable and could lead to deficiencies or illness. Maintaining strength required constant vigilance and resourcefulness. Camaraderie was both a necessity and a survival mechanism. Soldiers relied on one another for morale, mutual protection, and practical support. Shared hardship forged bonds that were critical in both everyday labor and moments of combat. Humor, shared meals, and small rituals strengthened these ties, providing a psychological buffer against the relentless stress of military life. In essence, the Legion was not just a fighting force, it was a community structured around survival, cooperation, and mutual dependence. Yet unpredictability was always present. Marching orders could change abruptly, supply lines could be disrupted, and enemy encounters were unpredictable. A soldier had to be ready to shift from labor to battle at a moment's notice, maintaining focus and adaptability. Success relied on the ability to endure discomfort, anticipate needs, and respond quickly under pressure. Each day was a lesson in balancing routine with flexibility, discipline with initiative, and personal endurance with collective responsibility. The psychological resilience required was immense. Soldiers lived with uncertainty, constant physical strain, and the looming possibility of combat. Many developed mental strategies to cope. Repetition, ritual, and reliance on the structure of command created a sense of order in an otherwise chaotic existence. Yet questions linger about the personal toll of such a life. How did legionaries reconcile the monotony of daily labor with the constant potential for violence? Did the bonds of camaraderie, routine, and duty sustain them? Or did the relentless demands leave subtle, unrecorded scars on their minds and bodies? As the life of a Roman legionary unfolds, a clearer picture emerges of what it took to maintain an army capable of defending and expanding an empire. Their days followed a relentless rhythm of training, marching, labor, and vigilance, each element essential for survival and military efficiency. Discipline was ingrained from the moment a soldier awoke until the night watch, shaping behavior, endurance, and collective cohesion. Every march, construction task, and drill contributed to a system designed to ensure the empire's stability. The physical demands were extraordinary. Marches across difficult terrain with heavy packs tested strength and endurance daily. Labor, tasks from digging fortifications to hauling materials, required stamina, skill, and careful coordination. Even minor lapses could result in injury or compromise the unit's safety. Legionaries learned to endure these hardships, transforming physical strain into routine. Adaptability was crucial. Soldiers had to maintain readiness for combat while executing tasks that were sometimes monotonous, sometimes perilous, and always essential. Camaraderie and social bonds were vital. Shared hardship created mutual dependence beyond duty. Bonds, forged in labor, marches, and combat provided emotional support, strengthened morale, and ensured cooperation during crises. Humor, shared meals, and quiet acts of solidarity became tools to cope with relentless pressure, transforming individual endurance into collective resilience. Health and survival required careful attention to routines, nutrition, hygiene, and Care for injuries were constant concerns. Latrines, cooking, and medical knowledge were rudimentary. Yet soldiers developed strategies to maintain both health and readiness. Every decision how to rest, ration food, or monitor a comrade carried weight. Minor negligence could have serious consequences, showing that survival in the Legion depended on discipline, observation, and practical intelligence. The psychological toll was significant. Soldiers balanced the monotony of labor with the unpredictability of battle. Resilience, both physical and mental, was cultivated through routine, structure, and trust among comrades. It was this combination of discipline, skill, and human solidarity that allowed the Roman army to function across vast territories and harsh conditions. As you imagine a legionary rising before dawn, marching through dust and sun, constructing fortifications, and remaining ready for any threat, one thought lingers: how much of Rome's power rested on the silent endurance of these soldiers? Beyond strategy, leadership, and conquest, the empire depended on men transforming exhaustion into routine, danger into cooperation, and discipline into resilience. Reminder that history often rests on the quiet persistence of ordinary lives. In ancient Rome, the grandeur of temples, forums, and villas often concealed a more precarious reality: the city's vulnerability to nature. Weather, particularly storms and floods, could turn daily life into a struggle for survival. The Tiber River, essential for trade and transport, was unpredictable, swelling after heavy rain and overflowing its banks. Streets became rivers, homes and shops suffered damage, and the city's infrastructure strained under the weight of water. For ordinary citizens, weather was never a mere inconvenience, it was a constant, unpredictable threat. Rainstorms could arrive suddenly, washing debris into streets and marketplaces. Dirt roads became muddy quagmires, slowing travel and commerce. Market goods, exposed to the elements, risked spoilage or loss. Homes, especially the insulae of the urban poor, were often poorly constructed, with wooden beams and tile roofs prone to leakage. Heavy storms could collapse roofs or weaken structures, leaving families vulnerable. Even modest rainfall disrupted daily routines, forcing Romans to improvise shelter, adjust schedules, and navigate treacherous streets. Flooding from the Tiber posed an even greater danger. Seasonal rains could swell the river beyond its banks, inundating neighborhoods, washing away possessions, and spreading waterborne diseases. Wealthier citizens sometimes had the advantage of elevated homes, better drainage, or fortified storage areas. The urban poor often faced entire streets submerged in murky, contaminated water. Access to food, clean water, and safe passage became urgent challenges. Survival required awareness, preparation, and quick responses to rapidly changing conditions. Citizens developed strategies to cope. Sandbags, elevated platforms, and makeshift barriers protected homes and possessions. Merchants moved goods to higher ground or temporarily relocated shops. Families monitored weather patterns, river levels, and seasonal trends, learning to anticipate periods of risk. Despite these measures, unpredictability remained. A sudden storm or flood could undo weeks of preparation, demonstrating the limits of human control over nature. Floods also shaped social and economic life. Recovery often relied on communal cooperation. Neighbors reinforced structures, salvaged belongings, and provided temporary shelter. Public works, like embankments and drainage channels, reflected Rome's attempts to tame nature. Yet these systems were imperfect and required constant maintenance. The Tiber's unpredictability reminded citizens that even a powerful city remained at the mercy of environmental forces. As you imagine standing on a street corner, watching the Tiber swell and rain pour from darkened skies, one question lingers. How did ordinary Romans maintain calm, plan ahead, and protect their lives when nature was so unpredictable? Did survival become instinctive, or did the constant threat of flooding shape every aspect of urban life in ways history rarely records? As you step further into the rhythms of life in ancient Rome, the impact of weather and flooding becomes increasingly clear. Romans had learned that survival required more than just shelter. It demanded anticipation, resourcefulness, and communal cooperation. The Tiber River, vital for commerce and travel, was also a constant source of anxiety. Seasonal rains could swell its waters in days, sometimes hours, turning familiar streets into treacherous waterways. Citizens had to adapt quickly, or risk losing not only property but access to vital resources such as food and clean water. Homes and neighborhoods were built with an awareness of environmental threats, yet limitations were significant. The urban poor, residing in insulate with wooden beams and fragile walls, were particularly vulnerable. A sudden flood could collapse floors, destroy possessions, and force families into temporary shelters. Wealthier citizens had advantages: stone construction, elevated floors, and access to storage areas above flood level. Yet even these precautions could fail in exceptionally heavy rains, reminding all residents that nature could not be fully controlled. Public infrastructure was central to managing these threats. Rome's engineers built embankments, canals, and rudimentary drainage systems to channel water away from populated areas. Streets were sometimes raised or paved to reduce water accumulation. Yet maintenance was labor-intensive, and failures were common. Blocked drains, neglected channels, or unexpected downpours could overwhelm even the most well-prepared neighborhoods. The efficiency of these systems often depended on local vigilance. Residents and officials alike had to monitor water levels and respond to emerging dangers in real time. Daily life was profoundly shaped by anticipation. Merchants moved goods to higher ground before heavy rains. Families kept essential supplies within easy reach, and temporary barriers were erected to protect homes. The psychological impact of these precautions was as significant as the physical labor itself. Romans developed routines and habits to cope with uncertainty, training themselves to observe subtle changes in weather, river currents, or cloud patterns. Their resilience was a blend of practical skill, communal effort, and constant awareness. Floods also created ripple effects across the city. Market disruptions could lead to shortages or spoilage of perishable goods. Contaminated water spread disease, particularly in densely populated neighborhoods. Recovery required coordinated efforts. Neighbors assisted one another in clearing debris, repairing structures, and ensuring access to food and water. These responses reinforced social bonds, demonstrating that survival was not purely an individual endeavor but a communal challenge, demanding cooperation and ingenuity. And yet, unpredictability remained a defining feature. Even the most prepared citizens could be caught off guard by sudden storms or rapidly rising waters. Every flood was a reminder of human vulnerability and the limits of urban planning. As you picture citizens balancing precariously on makeshift platforms, salvaging possessions, and navigating streets turned into rivers, one question emerges: How did Romans cultivate the endurance, vigilance, and adaptability required to live continuously under the shadow of nature's unpredictable power? Was resilience something learned, inherited, or instinctive in a city perpetually negotiating survival with the forces of weather? As you observe life in ancient Rome, the relationship between citizens and nature reveals itself as a constant negotiation. Floods and storms were not occasional inconveniences. They were persistent, often unpredictable forces that shaped daily existence. The Tiber River, essential for trade and transport, could transform from a useful resource to a source of chaos in a matter of hours. Streets became canals, homes were submerged, and marketplaces were disrupted. Survival required constant vigilance, preparedness, and a willingness to adapt at a moment's notice. Rome's citizens developed a wide array of strategies to contend with these natural threats. Elevated homes, sandbag barriers, and makeshift platforms became part of the urban landscape. Merchants learned to relocate goods quickly, while families stockpiled essentials in anticipation of storms. Public works, including embankments, canals, and drainage systems, reflected both ingenuity and necessity, yet these constructions were never infallible. Even well-prepared neighborhoods could be overwhelmed by unusually severe floods, demonstrating the limits of human control over the natural world. Community cooperation was crucial. Survival often depended on neighbors helping one another to protect property, recover from damage, and access necessities. Floods disrupted not just individual households but entire social networks, requiring coordinated effort to restore functionality. These moments of crisis reinforced bonds among citizens, illustrating how shared vulnerability could foster solidarity. Yet dependence on others was paired with anxiety. The success of each household was intertwined with the actions, foresight, and resilience of the community around it. Health and sanitation were further complications. Floodwaters carried waste, debris, and contamination, making disease a constant threat. Waterborne illnesses, such as dysentery and typhoid, spread rapidly in flooded districts, disproportionately affecting the urban poor. Maintaining clean drinking water, storing food safely, and protecting vulnerable family members required both skill and vigilance. The city's physical grandeur offered little protection against these invisible dangers, highlighting how environmental challenges could undermine even the most organized society. Psychologically, Romans lived in a state of calculated vigilance, anticipating storms, observing river levels, and preparing for emergencies became second nature. The unpredictability of weather demanded constant attention, teaching citizens resilience, adaptability, and resourcefulness. Over time, endurance became part of daily life, shaping routines, habits, and social interactions. The grandeur of Rome's architecture, commerce, and political might relied in no small part on the quiet, continuous labor of its citizens, managing survival against the forces of nature. And yet, despite preparation and ingenuity, uncertainty remained ever present. Every storm, every surge of the Tiber was a reminder that control was limited, and that survival was a negotiation with forces far greater than human design. As you imagine citizens navigating flooded streets, salvaging possessions, and cooperating to endure, one question lingers: how much of Rome's strength and resilience lay not in its armies, leaders, or monuments, but in the everyday and adaptability of ordinary people confronting nature's unpredictable power? Ancient Rome was a city that thrived on public spectacles, from religious ceremonies to gladiatorial games. Festivals punctuated the calendar, transforming ordinary streets into scenes of exuberance, noise, and overwhelming activity. For the average citizen, attending a festival was as much a challenge as it was a celebration. Crowds surged through narrow streets, markets overflowed, and the air was filled with the mingling scents of cooked meats, incense, and sweat. While these events were meant to inspire devotion and communal pride, they also tested patience, endurance, and personal safety. Roman festivals were carefully scheduled around religious observances, seasonal cycles, and civic duties. Days could begin with morning processions, featuring priests, musicians, and participants in ceremonial dress. By midday, forums and marketplaces became arenas of social interaction, negotiation, and observation. The streets were crowded with people from all walks of life, each navigating the surge of humanity with their own strategies. Pushing, jostling, and occasional skirmishes were common, particularly in narrow alleys or near popular venues. The chaos demanded both physical agility and mental alertness, turning even a simple walk through the city into a calculated maneuver. Spectacles often culminated in gladiatorial games, theatrical performances, or religious rituals at temples. These events drew citizens in such numbers that seating, visibility, and access to refreshments became sources of tension. The Colosseum and other arenas were engineered to manage large crowds, but the sheer volume of participants still posed logistical challenges. Lines for food, water, or entry could be long, and accidents tripping, falling, or fainting were frequent. While the spectacle inspired awe and collective identity, it also imposed physical and psychological strain on attendees. Food and drink played a central role in the festival experience. Street vendors and temporary stalls offered simple fare: bread, salted fish, fruit, and wine. Maintaining nourishment and hydration was critical in the face of relentless crowds, heat, and prolonged standing. For the urban poor, securing sufficient provisions could be a matter of survival rather than indulgence. Even in celebration, daily realities, hunger, fatigue, and discomfort persisted. The need to navigate chaos while managing basic physical needs highlighted the dual nature of festivals, simultaneously joyful and exhausting. Hygiene and sanitation were additional challenges. Temporary surges of people strained public facilities, and waste accumulated quickly in the streets. Romans were accustomed to the smells, the mud, and the clutter, but the intensity during festivals was exceptional. The experience required tolerance and adaptability, a mental and physical endurance rarely appreciated in historical accounts focused on the spectacle rather than the lived reality of attendance. And yet, despite the exhaustion and discomfort, festivals remained central to Roman identity. They reinforced religious devotion, civic belonging, and social cohesion. But one question lingers as you picture the bustling streets, the jostling crowds, and the endless noise. How did ordinary citizens balance enthusiasm, participation, and survival in an environment so overwhelming, so chaotic, and so relentlessly demanding? Was endurance learned, instinctive, or simply a matter of necessity in a city built for spectacle as much as daily life? As the festival unfolds, the intensity of Roman public life becomes ever more apparent. Streets that are ordinarily crowded take on a new scale of chaos. Merchants, performers, and participants push through narrow alleys, creating bottlenecks and surges that can leave even the most agile citizen breathless. For the average Roman, survival in such an environment required constant awareness, watching for pickpockets, navigating uneven roads, and maintaining personal space amid pressing bodies. Crowds were simultaneously exhilarating and exhausting, a physical and mental test that could last for hours or even days. Processions were central to the experience. Religious leaders, magistrates, and civic officials moved through streets in elaborate displays of power and piety. The sight of priests carrying sacred objects, musicians playing flutes and drums, and dancers performing ritual movements captivated observers, but also slowed movement, requiring patience and adaptability. Festivals combined performance with participation. Citizens were both audience and participant, expected to engage, cheer, and move along with the spectacle while managing the practical realities of standing, walking, or securing a vantage point. Food and drink, though plentiful, became a logistical challenge. Temporary stalls offered bread, dried fish, fruits, and wine, but the crush of people meant access was never guaranteed. For the urban poor, attending a festival might involve careful planning to ensure they could eat and remain hydrated. Even the wealthier citizens had to contend with long waits, the risk of spoiled food in the heat, and the challenge of transporting refreshments without losing them to the crowd. Sustenance was intertwined with endurance. The ability to maintain energy levels was essential for navigating the festival's demands. Sanitation remained a significant concern. Streets overflowing with people quickly accumulated waste, mud, and refuse. Latrines and designated waste areas were inadequate for the sudden surge, and citizens often had to step carefully to avoid hazards underfoot. Despite these conditions, the crowds pressed forward, driven by religious duty, civic pride, or the desire to witness spectacle. Endurance, both physical and mental, became as crucial as enthusiasm. The ability to navigate the chaos determined who could participate fully and who would be sidelined by exhaustion or misfortune. Camaraderie and shared experience played a subtle but vital role. Friends, family, and neighbors often attended festivals together, helping one another navigate the press of people, share food, or find advantageous spots for viewing. Collective support provided a buffer against the fatigue and hazards of the crowd, reinforcing social bonds even amid disorder. The experience of surviving a festival became a microcosm of Roman society, a mixture of structure, unpredictability, and mutual reliance, where endurance and cooperation were inseparable. And yet, even with preparation, resilience, and companionship, the unpredictability of crowds created persistent tension. Moments of exhilaration could quickly shift to confusion, injury, or fatigue. As you imagine the streets filled with pressing bodies, shouting vendors, and the clamor of processions, one question lingers: how did Romans cultivate the stamina, awareness, and composure necessary to endure festivals that were as physically demanding as they were socially and spiritually significant? Were these qualities learned through experience, inherited culturally, or forged through necessity in a city built for spectacle and survival alike? As the festival reached its peak, the streets of Rome became a living noisy, crowded, and unpredictable. Processions wound through the city, performers captivated audiences, and merchants jostled for attention. For those navigating the throng, endurance was tested to its limits. Staying aware, maintaining balance, and preserving personal safety amid surging crowds was as crucial as participating in the celebration itself. Each festival was both a spectacle and a subtle test of human stamina and adaptability. Crowds, though chaotic, also fostered community. Neighbors and families moved together, guiding one another through congestion, sharing food and water, and maintaining morale. Participation demanded coordination, patience, and cooperation. Festivals mirrored Roman society, where survival, engagement, and identity were intertwined with social bonds and shared efforts. Food, though abundant, remained a practical concern. Temporary stalls could not always meet the volume of visitors. Bread, salted fish, fruits, and wine were distributed unevenly, requiring resourcefulness. The urban poor relied on generosity or careful planning, while wealthier attendees navigated crowds efficiently to secure provisions. Nutrition and hydration were inseparable from endurance, showing that celebration in Rome involved both survival and spectacle. Sanitation also challenged participants. Mud, refuse, and human waste accumulated quickly. Even amid joy, careful attention was needed to avoid accidents, maintain cleanliness, and protect health. Psychological demands were significant as well. Hours in dense crowds required focus, patience, and quick decision-making. Observation, anticipation, and adaptability were essential. As you imagine citizens standing shoulder to shoulder, navigating congested streets, and participating in rituals, one question lingers. How did Romans cultivate the resilience, awareness, and composure to thrive in such physically demanding, socially complex, and psychologically taxing environments? Their endurance reveals not just the spectacle of festivals, but the quiet skills that allowed ordinary citizens to survive and participate fully in the relentless rhythm of urban life. Thank you for staying here, for wandering quietly through the streets and stories of a world so distant, yet alive in your imagination. Together, we've glimpsed the crowded markets, the relentless sun on the Roman stones, and the hum of lives that pulsed so differently from our own. As you let your thoughts drift, imagine the city now, hushed and empty, shadows stretching long over the cobbled roads. Feel the cool night settling in, gentle and patient, wrapping the world in a quiet hush. Wherever you are now, may your night be just as still as theirs once was. If you feel like it, you're welcome to subscribe, to wander with me through more whispered histories and sleepy journeys, but only if your heart leans that way. Now, let your eyelids grow heavy, and picture the lanterns dimming, one by one, as the evening folds softly around you. Snow might be settling silently on distant rooftops, or a single candle flickers out in a window, leaving a calm darkness that feels safe and warm. Rest, friend, and let the quiet of history cradle you into sleep.